I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on Spotlight, we're diving into a wonderful book. It is called While in Darkness There Is Light, Idealism and Tragedy on an Australian Commune. It is written by Louella Bryant. This compelling book takes us into the world of a 1970s commune in Australia, exploring the hopes, dreams, and ultimate heartbreak that unfolded among a group of idealists. The author captures the spirit of an era and the profound lessons from a community in search of a better life. We're delighted to have this very talented author join us here today on Spotlight, and we ask viewers like you to support authors like her by subscribing to our channel and by purchasing her amazing book. The links are below this interview. Louella, thank you so much for joining me here today on Spotlight.
I'm delighted to be here, Logan.
This is such a great book. Tell us a little bit about the inspiration for it.
Well, my husband went to boarding school with Howard Dean and his younger brother, Charlie, who is a year ahead of my husband. And so when Howard was running for president in 2003, US president, that is, he went to Hawaii to receive Charlie's remains from Laos. And I asked my husband, what is this all about? What's going on with Howard? And he explained to me that he had been living in this commune in Australia with Charlie. And you'd have to know Charlie, but Charlie decided, he was very political. He decided he wanted to see where the fighting had been in Southeast Asia. And this is 1974. And so he set off with a friend he picked up, a young Australian fellow. And he traveled through Cambodia, Thailand, and then he was coming down the Mekong River on a ferry boat, and there was a war going on in Laos, and Laotian soldiers called the ferry boat over for a checkpoint, and Charlie took a picture of one of the soldiers, and that was just forbidden. So he was taken prisoner along with his Australian friend and marched into a rainforest prison camp where he and Alex were held for 3 months. Meantime, Howard and his father are desperately trying to find him and get him out of there. And so ultimately, Charlie and his friend were executed by the Pathet Lao communists. So Harry told me that story, and I said, that sounds like a book. Do you think Howard would allow me to write it? And he said, why don't you get in touch with him? Well, he was campaigning for president, but I managed to find him because he lives in Vermont and we live in Vermont. And I tracked him down and he said, come to the Democratic headquarters in Burlington and let's talk. And so I did, and we sat down and he said, tell me what you want me to do. And I said, I'd like you to write the foreword. So he did. And that's how the book began. Howard was incredibly generous. The book came out actually in 2008. So it's been out for a while. And this was the original copy. And Howard asked me not to promote it, not to market it, because his mother was still alive. And you can imagine what it must have been like to lose a son, especially a son in that way. So the book was not made, it was published by a small press in New York, Black Lawrence Press. And they didn't make it into an ebook or an audiobook or any of that, just the paperback. And so it didn't sell that well. And then I republished it through a publishing service. And we put Howard's foreword in the back. So it's now the afterword because it's very lengthy about his search for Charlie's remains, and also very emotional. And I thought it would be a good idea to read about Charlie before you read about how Howard discovered his remains. So we changed a few things with Howard's permission. And then it's been republished in audiobook, ebook, hardcover, as well as paperback. And it's taken on a new life. So that kind of is the trail of writing the book, and also a trip I took to Australia to experience what it must have been like firsthand there.
Tell us a little bit about your research. You traveled to Australia, obviously, but how did you find out about communal living and so forth?
Well, I did a lot of interviewing, and for a lot of people, it was sort of hard to remember, but there were basically three fellows who, you're too young to have remembered the Vietnam era, but I think it was 1969 or 1970 when student protests were happening all over the country, and four students were killed at Kent State in Ohio. And colleges shut down early that year. They shut down after midterm exams at colleges all over the country. I was at George Washington University in DC, and my college shut down too. So three of the boys decided they were going to just leave the country and become expatriates. And I think that's kind of important because I'm hearing in the last few days a lot of people are talking about becoming expatriates. So we may be in that sort of movement again. So they were boys from boarding schools, sort of upper class boys. And you have to understand, this is not my culture. I come from, Moonshine, Virginia. So it became sort of an ethnography for me in learning about how do 19-year-old boys who have financial means, what do they do with their lives especially when they leave the country? So they traveled around the world a little bit and they ended up in Australia. They bought 400 acres of land with some family money, and they set up this farming commune. So it became an agricultural farm. And then they proceeded to build a 54-foot cement boat so they could go out fishing and charter fishing. I mean, these guys were really smart and very ambitious. And then Charlie and my husband Harry stayed in school until 1973 when they graduated. And then they went to Australia because they wanted to see what this project was. So my husband lived there, and a lot of the information and the research comes from interviews with these people, but also from journals and letters. Harry is the kind of guy who doesn't throw anything away, which kind of drives me crazy. But he had letters from Charlie and letters from some of the other boys, and a journal that he had kept. And in the journal, he had put a lot of quotes, and he especially liked James Baldwin. And so, "While in darkness there is light" is a quote from James Baldwin. And the idea is that even in the darkest of times, you will find a light somewhere. And Charlie was not only was he political, but he was also very spiritual. And wherever he went, he sort of lifted people up and brought them to the light to help them, see things from a wider perspective. So that was an interesting trip to Australia.
Sure, that's quite a wonderful tribute to Charlie to leave this legacy of this book in his memory, at least in part. Let me ask you this, life on the commune, people started it with high ideals. Did it live up to what they wanted it to be? Or were there disappointments? Were there clashes? Was there a harsh reality when it came to communal living?
Well, I guess you could say my brand, if there is such a thing, is sort of breaking down class and economic barriers. So the boys at the commune attracted a lot of local Australians who came, and so it was an interesting dichotomy between the American boys who came from wealth and these Australians who basically had nothing. So they were allowed to live on the farm for room and board as long as they worked, but they had to work. And then the Australians wanted to, grow pot and sell pot. And Kim Haskell, who was kind of the leader of the whole thing, said he forbid that. So he wanted to be a farm that could grow produce and vegetables and sell them at markets and really make a living off the land. And eventually, Kim moved, you'll see in the book, Kim bought 3,000 acres of land farther north in Bloomfield, up in far north Queensland. And Rich Trapnell took over the farm and turned it into an exotic palm farm. So he collected seeds from all over Southeast Asia and grew these exotic palms and sold them for landscaping. So it sort of switched a little bit. And then in the last few years, the farm has been sold to a developer because most of the people, this was 1974, 75. Most of the people have either died or moved to cities. It's been purchased by a developer who's turning it into an event center, but also trying to keep the flavor of this rugged Australian bush commune. So it's still there, and you can look it up. Rosebud Farm has a website.
Wonderful. I could see a lot of attraction to a lot of people to go stay, Airbnb this,
Yeah.
1970s Australian commune. I think it could be off the charts on Airbnb listings, as a matter of fact. But it's great that it's still there. Before we leave you today, I want to ask you, what do you hope readers take away from this book? What they learned from this era, what they learned from Charlie's life?
Well, my husband went to Harvard, and when the book first came out, he was having a reunion there, and they allowed me to give a talk to some of the alumni. And I said, "What would you do if your son or daughter said they wanted to go to the other side of the world and start a farm?" And they said, "We would lock them in the closet until they came to their senses." And one of the things that I discovered about young people is that the frontal lobe of the brain doesn't really develop fully until your late 20s. And you have children, so you probably have experienced that yourself. And these guys were 22, 23 years old. So Charlie went into things without really researching them and exploring them. Just sort of, and yet the letters he wrote back showed that he was having second thoughts and it didn't feel like the right thing to be doing, but he just went headfirst into it anyway. So if he'd listened to his gut instead of his head, I think he might have turned around and come back to Australia or gone back to New York. I know he was planning to go into the Peace Corps and never had the chance to do that. So Howard retrieved his remains, and the afterword is really amazing to read. It's just so emotional. He found Charlie's body in a bomb crater with bullet holes all through it, and brought him back to Southampton on Long Island, where the Dean burial site is. So I had the opportunity to go to the cemetery and actually, give my regards to Charlie there. So that was really meaningful to me. So it's because it's a true story and not a novel. I usually write novels. I think that it has more meaning for people to just try to talk to your children and make sure they understand what they're getting into before they set off on their own for an adventure.
Yeah, the permanency of death, I don't think really is well understood by young people. It's part of what fuels the adventurous spirit because they have no fear. They feel they're immortal. Of course, they're not. Charlie was not. But it is a fascinating look at a bygone era and made even more real by the afterword by Howard Dean, because everybody knows who he is. And to see that this was part of his experience and life story as well is quite fascinating. For the folks at home, the name of the book is While in Darkness There is Light, Idealism and Tragedy on an Australian Commune. It is a compelling book that takes us into the world of a 1970s commune in Australia, exploring the hopes, dreams, and ultimate heartbreak that unfolded among a group of idealists. Louella, thank you so much for joining me here today on Spotlight.
Thank you for having me, Logan. It's been a pleasure.
Pleasure's been all mine. I appreciate your insight and your wisdom. To the folks at home, I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time this time. Until next time on Spotlight.